What do you do when you discover your own son has been stealing your life's work piece by piece, and the land you bled for is almost gone? Maria Hernandez found out on Tuesday morning in late September, the kind of Central California day when the valley heat finally breaks and you can smell earth instead of dust. She was 74 years old, standing in her kitchen in Fresno with a stack of property tax documents spread across the Formica table, trying to make sense of numbers that didn't add up. The kitchen smelled like café de olla, cinnamon and piloncillo sweetening strong coffee, and through the window she could see the peach orchard her late husband had planted 40 years ago. 23 acres of trees that knew every season of their marriage, every birthday party, every argument, every reconciliation. The branches were heavy with late-season fruit, golden and blushing in the morning light. Except the documents in front of her said she only owned 11 acres now. Maria's hands, gnarled from decades of farm work, strong despite her age, went still on the papers. She read the line again, 11.4 acres. But she'd inherited 23 from her husband when he died 6 years ago. She'd never sold anything, never even considered it. The property records showed 3 separate transactions over the past 18 months. Each one signed with her power of attorney, each one transferring parcels to a development company she'd never heard of, and every single signature authorized by her son, Daniel. Daniel was her youngest, 42 years old, never married, living in a converted garage apartment behind her house that smelled like microwaved burritos and disappointment. He'd been managing her finances since the minor stroke 2 years ago. Nothing serious, the doctor said, but enough that paperwork gave her headaches, and Daniel had offered to help. She trusted him. He was her son. You trust your children, even when they've let you down before, even when they've borrowed money they never paid back, even when they show up at Thanksgiving with that particular shame in their eyes that means they need something. Maria had raised 3 children in this house. Carmen, the oldest, had always been the responsible one, straight A's, scholarship to nursing school, married with kids by 25. The middle child, Roberto, had moved to Arizona after high school, worked construction, called every few months, good kid, just distant. And then Daniel, her baby. The one who'd struggled in school but had the kindest heart, the one who brought home strayed animals and defended bullied kids and cried at sad movies, the one she'd always protected a little too much, maybe, the one who'd never quite figured out how to be an adult. Maria stood up from the table, her knees protesting, the same knees that had knelt in this soil for half a century, planting and weeding and praying. She walked outside, past the main house, toward the garage apartment where Daniel's truck was parked, covered in valley dust. The September morning was already warming up. Cicadas were starting their day-long chorus. A hummingbird zipped past, heading for the salvias Maria had planted by the driveway. Everything looked exactly as it had yesterday, last week, last month, but Maria's internal landscape had collapsed. She knocked on Daniel's door. No answer. She knocked again, harder. The door opened. Daniel stood there in a Fresno State t-shirt and basketball shorts, unshaven, eyes red-rimmed. He took one look at the papers in her hand, and his face collapsed like a building imploding from within. "Mama," he said. Just that. One word that contained everything, guilt and shame, and a plea she wasn't ready to hear. "How much?" she asked. Her voice was steady. 40 years of raising children through scraped knees and teenage heartbreak and harder things had taught her how to stay calm when her insides were screaming. "How much did you get for my land?" Daniel stepped back into his apartment. She followed, noting details she'd been too kind to see before. the empty beer cans overflowing from the trash, the fast food bags, the particular chaos of someone who'd stopped caring about anything except the thing that was consuming them. On the coffee table, a laptop showed of sports betting websites still logged in. The numbers there told their own story. Bets placed, bets lost, the desperate arithmetic of addiction chasing itself in circles. "I was going to win it back," he said, not meeting her eyes. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been crying or screaming or both. "Why didn't you tell me you were in trouble?" she asked, her voice cracked despite her efforts to stay steady. "Because you've already lost so much, Mama, Dad, your health. I couldn't tell you I was failing too. So you stole from me instead." The words hung there. Daniel flinched like she'd struck him. "I didn't think of it as stealing. I thought—" He stopped, started again. "I don't know what I thought. That one big win would make everything okay? I don't know. I wasn't thinking. That's the problem. When you're in it, you're not thinking." Maria felt something dangerous rising in her chest. Not just anger. She'd expected anger. This was something colder and more final. Disappointment so profound it felt like grief. She thought about her late husband, Miguel. He'd bought this land in 1979 with money saved from 10 years of construction work, 23 acres that cost everything they had and then some. They'd lived in a trailer on the property for the first 3 years, saving for the house, planting trees, building a life from nothing. Miguel had died 6 years ago, heart attack while pruning the peach trees, gone before the ambulance arrived. Those trees were his legacy. The land was his promise to their children, something solid, something that couldn't be taken. Except it could, and it had been. "How much did you get?" Maria asked again. Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. "About 40,000 total for all 3 parcels." 40,000! The number was so absurd it almost made her laugh. 12 acres of Central California farmland, worth at least $20,000 an acre, sold for 40,000 total. "You let them rob you." "I was desperate. They knew. The developer, he knew I needed cash fast. He took advantage." "You took advantage," Maria corrected sharply, "of me, of your father's memory, of your sisters who were supposed to inherit this land someday." The rational response would be police, lawyers, prosecution for fraud and theft and elder abuse and whatever else the legal system could throw at someone who'd done this to their own mother. Maria's older daughter, Carmen, a nurse in Sacramento, with 3 kids and a mortgage and no patience for Daniel's problems, had been saying for years that he needed consequences and accountability. Carmen would tell her to press charges, to take back what was left, to cut Daniel off completely and let him figure out his own mess. And Carmen would be right by any reasonable measure. But Maria was thinking about something else. A memory from when Daniel was 7, long before the gambling, before the disappointments, before everything went wrong. It was summer, peach harvest season. The whole family working together in the orchard, Miguel and Carmen and Roberto and Daniel. They'd found a baby bird that had fallen from its nest, tiny thing with a broken wing and no feathers yet, clearly dying. Miguel had said to leave it, nature's way. These things happened. But Daniel had scooped it up carefully, carried it to the house, made a nest from a shoebox and dish towels. He'd stayed up half the night feeding it with an eyedropper, keeping it warm, talking to it like it could understand. Maria had told him it probably wouldn't make it, that sometimes, no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't save things, that it was okay to let go. He'd looked at her with those earnest 7-year-old eyes and said, "But what if I can? What if trying is what matters?" For 2 weeks, he tended that bird, fed it, changed its bedding, kept it safe from the cats, and somehow and possibly it had survived, eventually flew away. Daniel had cried when it left, happy tears mixed with sad ones, the complex emotion of letting something go that you'd saved. She'd forgotten that version of her son existed, the one who believed broken things could heal if you cared enough. "Pack a bag," Maria said. Daniel looked up, confused. "What?" "You're going to rehab, today, right now. I'll drive you myself." "Mama, I can't afford." "I'll pay for it." Her voice was firm, brooking no argument. "With the money from selling the 3 acres I still own near the highway, the ones with good road frontage, they're worth something." Daniel's face twisted. "No, you can't. That's your retirement. That's mine to decide what to do with." She cut him off. "This is the deal. You go to rehab. You get treatment. You deal with this gambling problem before it kills you or lands you in prison or both. And maybe we can figure out what comes next." "And if I say no?" "Then I call the police right now, and I let Carmen handle the rest, because I will not watch you destroy yourself. If you won't save yourself, I'll save you the only way I can, by making you face consequences until you're ready to face yourself." She meant it. Daniel could see she meant it. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, I'll go." Maria drove into the facility that afternoon, a 2-hour trip through the Central Valley with its endless farms and dusty towns. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? The betrayal sat between them like a third passenger, taking up all the space. Daniel stared out the window at the landscape sliding past, almond orchards, vineyards, cotton fields, the agricultural bounty that had built this valley, that had given their family everything. At the intake desk, Daniel signed the papers with shaking hands. 28 days, no phone for the first week, family therapy in week 3. The counselor explained the rules calmly, professionally, having done this thousands of times. "I'll come visit," Maria said when it was time for him to go. "But you have to do the work, Daniel. I can't do it for you. Nobody can." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, Mama, I'm so sorry later," she said, echoing what she told him that morning. "Get better now." A counselor led him away through a locked door. Maria stood in the parking lot afterwards, suddenly exhausted, feeling every one of her 74 years pressing down on her shoulders. She drove home as the sun was setting, painting the valley in those impossible golds and reds that only happen in agricultural country where there's nothing to block the horizon. The peach trees cast long shadows across her remaining 11 acres. 11 acres. Not enough to farm commercially anymore, not enough to sell for retirement, not enough to split among her children as inheritance, just enough to be a reminder of everything that was gone. But Maria had spent 50 years coaxing life from California soil. She understood something most people didn't. You could grow anything from almost nothing if you were patient enough, if you paid attention, if you believed seeds held more potential than you could see with your eyes. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the same ceiling she'd stared at after Miguel died, trying to figure out how to go on without him. The same ceiling she'd stared at after her stroke, wondering if her body would ever feel like hers again. Around 2 a.m., she gave up on sleep, made chamomile tea, sat at her kitchen table in her bathrobe, the house creaking around her in that particular language of old houses settling. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Dr. Shaw, this is Daniel. Please don't block me. I know I don't deserve to ask, but can we talk? I need to explain. I'm not asking you to drop the charges. I just need you to understand why." Wrong number. Some other family's crisis. But Maria read it 3 times anyway, recognizing the desperate cadence of someone trying to make sense of their own failure. She thought about Daniel, sleeping tonight in a rehab facility, surrounded by strangers, facing the long work of becoming someone he could live with. She thought about her remaining 11 acres, small and insufficient by every practical measure, and she thought about the neighborhood around her farm. The neighborhood had changed dramatically in the 40 years she'd lived here. When she and Miguel first bought the land, it was mostly farm worker families, people who knew the land, who understood seasons and patience and the particular rhythm of agricultural life. But Fresno had grown. The city had sprawled outward and farmland had been replaced by development. Apartments and Section 8 housing had replaced fields. The middle school down the road, Jefferson Middle School, where Carmen and Roberto and Daniel had all gone, had gone from a decent school to a struggling one. The dropout rate made the news regularly. Gang activity had increased, the kind of statistics that made people with options move to better zip codes. Maria knew these kids. She'd been seeing them for years, walking past her property on their way to school, cutting through her orchard as a shortcut, occasionally stealing peaches, which she didn't mind. Hungry kids should eat fruit. They were the same age Daniel had been once, the same age all children are before life hammers them into whatever shape desperation demands. She thought about how many of them lived in apartments with no yards, no green space, no connection to where food actually came from or how it grew. She thought about the research she'd read, studies showing that kids who worked with plants showed improved focus, better emotional regulation, stronger sense of purpose. She thought about what 11 acres could become if she stopped thinking about what they weren't and started imagining what they could be. The idea came fully formed, the way good ideas sometimes do, not built piece by piece, but arriving complete, like it had been waiting for her to be ready to see it. A teaching garden, community space, free classes for neighborhood kids, learning to grow food, yes, but also learning patience, responsibility, the satisfaction of tending something and watching it thrive, learning that broken things, plants, relationships, people, could heal with the right care and enough time. It was ambitious, maybe crazy. She was 74 years old with a recovering stroke and a son in rehab and 11 acres that were supposed to be her security. Every practical part of her brain said this was foolish. But Maria had raised 3 children and run a farm for 50 decades. She knew the difference between foolish and faithful. Sometimes they looked the same from the outside, but they felt completely different from within. At dawn, she walked out to the orchard. The September morning was cool, that brief window before the valley heat reasserted itself. Dew clung to the grass. A mockingbird ran through its repertoire of stolen songs. The peach trees stood in their rows, patient and enduring, exactly as Miguel had planted them. "I'm going to try something," she said aloud to Miguel, to the trees, to the morning itself. "I don't know if it'll work, but I'm going to try." The trees didn't answer, but the light coming through their branches felt like permission. Maria spent the next week making calls. The principal at Jefferson Middle School, who she knew from church, a tired woman named Mrs. Patterson, who'd been fighting for these kids for 20 years with inadequate resources and too little support. "Maria, that sounds wonderful," Mrs. Patterson said when Maria explained her idea. "But you understand these kids, they're tough. They've got a lot going on. Trauma, instability, family chaos. They're not going to be your perfect little farm helpers." "I know," Maria said. "I raised 3 kids and one of them is currently in rehab for gambling addiction. I'm not looking for perfect. I'm looking for honest." Mrs. Patterson laughed, a real laugh, surprised and delighted. "Okay, yes, I'll send you some names, kids who might benefit. No promises they'll show up, but I'll try." The youth outreach coordinator at the rec center was next, a young man named James, who'd grown up in this neighborhood himself, who understood exactly what Maria was offering. "This could really be good," he said. "We've got kids with no structure, no positive adult relationships, nothing to do after school except get into trouble. Giving them something to care for, something to be responsible for, that matters more than people realize." The woman who ran the after-school program at the library, the pastor at the Catholic church, the director of the Boys and Girls Club. Maria worked her network, which was larger than she'd realized. 5 decades in a community builds connections you don't see until you need them. Everyone said yes, because everyone understood what Maria understood. Kids who'd been told they were problems their whole lives needed someone to show them they could grow something beautiful. The first Saturday in October, 23 kids showed up, ages ranging from 9 to 16. Some came because their parents made them. Some came because the flyer promised snacks. Some came because they had nothing better to do, and the alternative was hanging out behind the 7-Eleven, getting into the kind of trouble that started small and ended permanent. Maria stood in front of them in her work clothes, jeans and a long-sleeved shirt and the wide-brim hat she'd worn for 5 decades. Behind her, 11 acres of possibility. 23 kids, 23 chances, the same number as the acres she'd lost. The symbolism wasn't lost on her, though she didn't mention it. "This is a peach orchard," she said. "My husband planted these trees before most of you were born. Trees live longer than people if you take care of them. That's what we're going to learn here, how to take care of things, how to be patient, how to grow." The kids stared at her with varying degrees of interest. A few looked genuinely curious, most looked bored, a couple looked openly hostile, the particular hostility of kids who'd learned early that adults' promises were just words. One kid in the back, maybe 13, wearing a Lakers jersey 3 sizes too big, raised his hand. "What if we kill the plants?" "Then we plant new ones," Maria said simply. "That's how you learn. My husband used to say the best fertilizer is a farmer's mistake. You kill some plants, you figure out why, you do better next time. Same as life." A ripple went through the group. This wasn't what they'd expected. They'd expected to be scolded for doing things wrong. They hadn't expected permission to fail. Maria divided them into groups, showed them the different sections of land, some still planted with peach trees, some open for new planting. She'd spent the previous week preparing beds, marking out areas, gathering tools from donations and her own supplies. She taught them how to read the soil, how to recognize good drainage versus clay hardpan, how to amend with compost, which she'd been making for 40 years, a continuous cycle of kitchen scraps and garden waste becoming black gold. She showed them seedlings she'd started, tomatoes, peppers, squash, beans. Fall planting season in the Central Valley, perfect timing. She taught them the Spanish names alongside the English, calabaza and squash, cilantro and coriander, elote and corn. Her voice carrying the lilt of someone who'd learned English as a second language and never fully lost the music of her first. Some kids got bored after 20 minutes and wandered off to mess around in the orchard. Maria let them go. You couldn't force interest. It had to grow on its own time. But 15 stayed. 15 had planted something. 15 had gotten dirt under their nails and learned the Spanish word for tomato and heard an old woman tell them that failure was just part of learning. As they were leaving, the kid in the Lakers jersey, she'd learned his name was Marcus, approached her. "Can we come back next week?" "Of course. Every Saturday morning, 9 a.m., unless it's raining. We don't work in the rain, but most Saturdays I'll be here." "What if we mess up between now and then? What if our plants die?" "Then next Saturday we'll figure out why and try again. That's how gardens work, Marcus. You show up, you pay attention, you learn." He nodded slowly, processing this. "My mom said you were the lady whose son stole from her. Is that true?" The other kids still nearby went quiet, listening. "Yes," she said, "that's true." "Why are you being nice to us then? If your own kid let you down, why trust us?" It was a fair question, a smart question, the kind of question that revealed Marcus had been paying more attention than he'd let on. "Because you're not him, you're you, and you deserve a chance to show who you are. Everybody deserves that." The garden sessions became weekly, then twice weekly. Maria added a Wednesday afternoon session for kids who couldn't make Saturdays. Word spread through the neighborhood, slowly at first, then faster as kids talked to each other, as parents saw changes in their children. By November, she had 40 kids rotating through. Not all at once, she divided them into groups, made sure each kid got attention and teaching. Some only came once or twice and never returned, but others came every single week without fail. Jasmine became a regular. 3 times a week she'd show up, sometimes with her grandmother, sometimes alone. She'd head straight for the tomato section, her section, as she'd started calling it. Maria had given her responsibility for an entire raised bed of tomato plants, 6 different varieties. "How are my babies doing?" Jasmine would ask, checking each plant, looking for signs of pests or disease or stress. Maria taught her everything: how to prune suckers, how to stake the plants as they grew, how to recognize when they needed water versus when they were getting too much, how to watch for hornworms, those huge green caterpillars that could strip a plant overnight. One afternoon in early November, Jasmine found a hornworm. She'd learned that the standard approach was to remove them, either by hand or with scissors, depending on your squeamishness level. But instead of removing it, she called Maria over. "Look," Jasmine said, "it's got those white things on it. What are those?" Maria looked closer. Braconid wasp larvae. They'd parasitized the hornworm, using it as a host for their own young. Nature's pest control. "Those are wasp eggs," Maria explained. "The wasps laid eggs inside the hornworm. When they hatch, they'll eat the hornworm from the inside. It's kind of brutal, but it's how nature works." Jasmine studied the hornworm with scientific fascination. "Should we leave it?" "What do you think?" "I think," Jasmine considered carefully, "I think we leave it because those wasps will help protect the other plants, and the hornworm, it's already done for. The wasps are using it to make more wasps that will help the garden." "That's exactly right," Maria said. "You're thinking like a real gardener now, seeing the whole system, not just one problem." Jasmine beamed. Marcus, the kid in the Lakers jersey, became another regular. He'd started bringing his younger brother, a quiet 8-year-old named Terrell, who'd been having trouble in school. The brothers worked together in companionable silence, the kind of silence that spoke of a deep bond, probably forged in difficult circumstances Maria didn't pry into. But she noticed things, the way Marcus always made sure Terrell ate first when she brought out snacks, the way he checked on his brother constantly, subtle glances, making sure he was okay, the protective vigilance of a kid who had to grow up too fast. One Saturday, Mrs. Patterson from Jefferson Middle School pulled Maria aside. "I wanted you to know Marcus's grades have improved, not dramatically, but measurably. And more importantly, his behavior has completely turned around. He used to be in my office twice a week for fights or disruptions. Haven't seen him once this whole month." "He's a good kid," Maria said. "He is, but he's had a hard go. Mother works 2 jobs, father's not in the picture, lots of responsibility at home. He's been raising Terrell essentially by himself. Kids like that, they don't usually find spaces where they can just be kids. But here, he seems different, lighter." Marcus watched Terrell showing Terrell how to use a trowel. Both brothers bent over a row of lettuce seedlings, the younger one listening intently to the older one's explanation. "Gardens are good for that," Maria said, "making things lighter." A 16-year-old named Sophia started coming in mid-November. She'd aged out of foster care the year before and was living in a group home, finishing high school while working part-time and trying to figure out what came next. She had the wary, self-sufficient demeanor of someone who'd learned early that adults weren't reliable. She showed up for 3 sessions without speaking much, just worked, observed, kept to herself. The 4th week, she approached Maria. "Could I learn to start a garden at my group home? We've got a yard nobody uses, just dead grass and weeds. But I was thinking some of the younger kids there, they could use something like this." Maria studied her. "You know how to do it? I can teach you." "I've been paying attention, watching what you do. I think I could figure it out, but I want to make sure I do it right. These kids, they've been through enough. I don't want to promise them something and then have it fail." "Then we'll make sure it doesn't fail," Maria said. "Can you come on a Wednesday afternoon? We'll plan it together." They spent the next Wednesday afternoon spread out on Maria's porch with graph paper and seed catalogs, designing a garden for the group home. Sophia took notes with the kind of focused intensity Maria recognized in herself at that age, the determination of someone who decided that if the world wasn't going to give her opportunities, she'd create her own. "Why are you doing this whole garden thing? You could have just kept your land private, lived quiet. Why invite all of us in?" Maria thought about how to answer, about Daniel and rehab, about 12 stolen acres, about the choice she'd made to build instead of burn down. Because land isn't worth anything if it's just sitting there. It has to grow something, and I decided I'd rather grow people than peaches. Sophia wrote that down in her notebook, underlining it. Daniel came home from rehab in early December, 28 days clean, shaky but sober, eyes clearer than they'd been in years. He moved back into the garage apartment because he had nowhere else to go, and Maria, despite everything, wasn't going to put her son on the street. The agreement was strict. Daily GA meetings, weekly therapy, random drug and alcohol tests. Gambling addicts often substituted other substances. And he'd gotten a job at a hardware store near Highway 99. Not glamorous, but honest work, 40 hours a week. They didn't talk much at first. Daniel went to work, came home, went to meetings, stayed in his apartment. Maria worked the garden, taught the kids, avoided thinking too much about the 12 acres that were gone forever. Carmen called from Sacramento, her voice tight with worry. "Mama, are you sure this is safe, having him there, after what he did?" "He's my son." "He's a thief." "He's both, mija. People are complicated. He did a terrible thing, but he's still my child." I don't want you to get hurt again." "I'm not going to forget what happened, Carmen, but I'm also not going to pretend he doesn't exist. There's a middle path. I'm trying to walk it." The first time Daniel showed up on a garden session, Maria was teaching a group of kids how to prune the peach trees. Winter pruning, cutting away dead wood, shaping growth for spring. It was late afternoon, the December light turning everything soft and golden. She looked up, and there he was, standing at the edge of the orchard, hands in his pockets, looking lost in the way she reminded him of him at 15, uncertain and hoping for acceptance. The kids noticed immediately. They'd learned who Daniel was. Word traveled through the neighborhood. The woman whose son stole from her, the garden that grew from loss. Jasmine moved closer to Maria protectively. Marcus's expression hardened. Sophia watched with calculated assessment. "Can I help?" Daniel asked. Every eye turned to Maria. The kids sensed this was important, even if they didn't fully understand why. This was a test of forgiveness or grace or whatever you wanted to call the thing that let broken people stand in the same space without destroying each other. Maria handed Daniel a pair of pruning shears. "Cut away anything dead or diseased," she said, her voice level. "Make clean cuts. Don't leave stubs. Stubs rot and invite infection." It was gardening advice. It was also life advice. Daniel understood both meanings. They worked together as the sun dropped toward the Sierra Nevada mountains in the distance, turning the sky impossible shades of orange and pink. The sound of shears cutting through wood, the smell of peach tree sap, sweet and sharp, the rustle of leaves in the December breeze. Daniel was tentative at first, unsure where to position himself in this new dynamic, but muscle memory took over. He'd pruned these trees as a teenager, back when he still helped with the farm, back before everything got complicated. Jasmine watched him carefully, still protective of Maria, still wary. "Are you Senora Maria's son?" she asked finally, her directness unfiltered by adult politeness. "Yeah," Daniel said. "She talks about you sometimes. She says you used to save baby birds." Daniel glanced at his mother, surprised. Maria kept pruning, didn't meet his eyes. "That was a long time ago," Daniel said quietly. "She says people can grow back too," Jasmine continued, with the blunt wisdom that sometimes emerged from children who'd seen hard things. "Like plants, if you take care of them right." Daniel's hands stilled on the shears. Maria saw his shoulders shake slightly, saw him fighting to hold himself together in front of these kids who were watching to see if adults could be trusted with vulnerability. "You're right," he said finally, his voice rough. "But it takes time, and you have to want to grow. You have to do the work. Nobody can do it for you." Marcus, working on a nearby tree, spoke without looking over. "My mom says that about addiction, that you can't make people quit. They have to choose it themselves." "Your mom's smart," Daniel said. "Yeah, but she also says people deserve second chances. So I guess that's what we're all doing here, getting chances." The simplicity of it, a 13-year-old articulating something Daniel had been struggling to understand for months. Second chances. That's what this garden was, what these kids represented, what his presence here meant. Daniel started coming to every session after that. At first, he just helped with manual labor, hauling mulch, fixing broken trellises, digging new beds. He didn't try to teach, didn't try to be anyone's friend, just worked quietly, proving through actions what words couldn't convey. But gradually, the kids accepted his presence the way they accepted the seasons, part of the landscape. His shame became less raw, worn down by weeks of showing up, of making amends through sweat and consistency. Marcus started asking him questions about building things, how to make raised beds square, how to attach drip irrigation, how to fix a broken gate hinge. Daniel had always been good with his hands, good at solving practical problems. It was the intangible problems, his own addictions, his own failures, that he never figured out. Sophia wanted help designing an irrigation system for the group home garden. They spent a Saturday afternoon with graph paper and measuring tapes, figuring out water pressure and timing and coverage. She asked direct questions about his recovery, not prying, just honestly curious. "How do you not gamble anymore? Like, what do you do when you want to?" "I call my sponsor. I go to a meeting. I come here, actually. Gardening, there's something about it that helps. You can't rush it. You can't force it. You just have to show up and do the work and trust the process." Like recovery. Exactly like recovery. A new kid started coming, a 9-year-old named Mateo who barely spoke. His caseworker explained he'd been removed from his home the previous year, neglect and abuse. Now he was in foster care, struggling to adjust, barely communicating with anyone. Mateo started following Daniel around, not talking, just shadowing him, watching everything he did. Maria noticed, but didn't intervene. Sometimes kids knew what they needed better than adults did. One afternoon in January, during a rare valley rainstorm, they all crowded into Maria's garage, the main one, not Daniel's apartment, waiting for the weather to pass. 20 kids, Maria, Daniel, a couple of volunteer parents. The space smelled like wet earth and rain on hot pavement, that particular Central Valley smell that meant the drought was temporarily broken. Maria made hot chocolate, the kids sat on overturned buckets and bags of soil, talking about their plants like proud parents. Jasmine reported on her tomatoes, all safely covered against the rain. Marcus explained a new chicken coop design he wanted to try. Sophia showed pictures of the group home garden they'd just planted. Mateo sat next to Daniel, still quiet, but comfortable in his presence, content to just be near someone who felt safe. "Your mom's cool," Marcus said to Daniel. "Not accusatory, just stating fact." "Yeah," Daniel agreed. "She's always been like that." "Did you mess up a lot?" Jasmine asked with her characteristic directness, unaware of or unconcerned of the weight of the question. "Yeah," Daniel admitted, meeting her eyes. "I messed up a lot. I'm still messing up, still learning." "But you're here now," Jasmine said, as if that settled everything. "Showing up." It was exactly what Maria had been telling him in the few conversations they'd had, what his therapist said, what his sponsor repeated. But hearing it from a 10-year-old girl who decided to trust him with her tomato wisdom, that hit differently. "Yeah," he said softly, "I'm here." Mateo, sitting beside him, reached out and put his small hand on Daniel's arm. Just that. No words, just connection. Daniel looked down at the boy's hand, then over at his mother. Maria met his eyes, and for the first time in months, something unspoken passed between them. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but recognition of effort, of showing up, of trying. Through the winter and into spring, the garden evolved in ways Maria hadn't anticipated. The kids who'd been coming since October were now teaching new kids. A hierarchy had emerged, not of power, but of knowledge and responsibility. Jasmine ran tomato workshops, showing newcomers how to start seeds, transplant seedlings, stake plants. She'd developed a whole curriculum based on what Maria had taught her, adding her own observations and innovations. Marcus designed and built a chicken coop from reclaimed pallets and salvaged materials. 6 hens arrived in March, donations from a farmer who'd heard about the project. The chickens laid eggs that the kids collected daily, selling them at a small farm stand Maria helped them set up near the road. The farm stand became its own teaching opportunity. Marcus handled the money, learning basic accounting. Jasmine made signs and her careful handwriting. Terrell, Marcus's younger brother, handled customer relations with surprising charm. They made enough money to buy more seeds, more supplies, to expand their operations. The kids were learning economics through practice, supply and demand, profit margins, the satisfaction of earning money through work they could be proud of. Sophia's group home garden was thriving. She'd rallied 6 younger kids to help maintain it, creating her own version of what Maria had built. The group home director reported remarkable changes, better behavior, improved school attendance, kids who'd been withdrawn suddenly volunteering for garden duty. It's giving them something to care for, something that needs them, that responds to their attention. These kids, most of them have been told their whole lives that there are problems. Here, they're solutions. They're the ones making things grow. Daniel had been sober for 8 months when Mateo's caseworker called with news. The boy's father had completed a treatment program, drugs primarily, with some alcohol involvement. He wanted to resume visitations, working toward reunification. It was good news. The system's goal was always family preservation when safe and possible. But Mateo was terrified. He showed up on the garden on a Tuesday afternoon, an unscheduled day, and found Daniel working alone, clearing an area for a new sensory garden section Sophia had proposed. "Can I stay here?" Mateo asked, his first unprompted words in weeks, maybe months. Daniel set down his shovel and sat on a nearby bench, gesturing for Mateo to join him. The boy sat close, the way kids do when they need reassurance but don't know how to ask for it directly. "What do you mean, buddy?" "When I go back to my dad, can I still come to the garden?" "Of course, you can always come to the garden. This is your place, too. Nothing changes that." "What if I mess up?" Mateo's voice was small. "What if I go back and I mess everything up again and they take me away again? What if I'm bad again? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. Maria, who'd arrived to drop off supplies and hadn't wanted to interrupt, watched from across the garden. "You know I messed up really bad, right?" Daniel said to Mateo. The boy nodded. "I stole from my mom, from my own mother. I took her land, her life's work, and I gambled it away. That's about the worst thing you can do to family." Mateo looked up at him with wide, serious eyes. "But she didn't give up on me. She made me go to treatment. She made me show up here even when I didn't want to. She made me prove I could be better, and I'm trying every single day. Some days are hard. Some days I really want to gamble. I see an ad for sports betting and my brain lights up like a Christmas tree. But I don't. I come here instead. I work. I help. I try to be the person she believes I can be." "Does it get easier?" Mateo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," Daniel said, and this time he meant it with his whole chest. "It gets easier, not perfect, it's never perfect, but easier. And you know what? Your dad coming back, that means he's trying too. He went to treatment, he's doing the work, just like me, just like you. We're all just trying to grow back." Mateo considered this. Then, "Can you help me when he comes for visits? Can you be here?" "Every time," Daniel promised. "Every single time." The conversation Maria had with Daniel that evening was the first real conversation they'd had since that morning in his apartment when she'd discovered the theft. Not the logistics, those had been handled through lawyers and treatment centers and payment plans, the actual emotional truth of what had happened and what it meant. They sat on her back porch as the sun set, surrounded by the garden that had grown from their shared devastation. The peach trees were starting to bloom, pink and white flowers covering the branches like hope made visible. "I thought you'd never forgive me," Daniel said. "I haven't, honestly. Not completely. Maybe not ever completely." Daniel nodded, accepting that. It was more than he deserved anyway. "But the point isn't forgiveness," Maria continued. "The point is what comes next, what you do with the failure. Anyone can succeed when things are easy, but what you do when you fail, when you're the one who caused the failure, that's what shows who you really are." "I destroyed your legacy, Dad's legacy." "No," Maria said firmly. "Your father's legacy was never just land. It was what the land taught us: patience, hard work, faith that seeds become harvests, faith that if you tend things properly, they grow. You can't steal that. It's still here." She gestured at the garden spreading out before them. "Different than we planned, but still growing, maybe growing better things than peaches ever could." Daniel's voice cracked. "How do you do that? How do you take something so terrible and turn it into something good?" "I didn't turn it into something good," Maria corrected. "I just refused to let it be only terrible. There's a difference. The theft still happened, the betrayal still hurts, but I get to choose what I plant in the soil that's left, and I chose this." By spring of year 2, the transformation was undeniable. The garden had become something larger than anyone had imagined. 47 kids were now regular participants. The word had spread through networks Maria hadn't even known existed, social workers talking to each other, teachers recommending it to struggling students, parents who'd seen changes in their children telling other parents. Mrs. Patterson from Jefferson Middle School reported measurable improvements. Test scores were up, the dropout rate had declined, discipline incidents had decreased. It wasn't just the garden, of course. There were multiple interventions happening simultaneously, but the garden was part of the ecosystem of change. Local police had noticed, too, fewer juvenile incidents in the neighborhood. Kids who might have been recruited into gangs were spending their afternoons with tomato plants instead. It sounded simplistic, almost naive, but the data was there. One afternoon, a reporter from the Fresno Bee showed up asking questions. How had this started? What was Maria trying to accomplish? Could this model be replicated? Maria gave her standard answer. She was just trying to use her land for something meaningful, to teach kids that growth takes patience, that failure isn't final, that with attention and care, almost anything could heal. The reporter wrote a story that ran on the front page of the local section. Within a week, Maria received calls from 3 other neighborhoods asking if she could help them start similar projects. She said yes, because the point was never ownership. The point was multiplication. A nonprofit called Growing Together reached out. They worked on urban agriculture and youth development. Would Maria consider partnering with them? They could provide funding, organizational support, help expand the model. Maria was hesitant at first. She'd built this organically without institutional involvement, and institutions had a way of complicating things that should be simple. But Daniel encouraged her. "Mama, you've proven the concept. Now it's time to scale it. Think about how many more kids you could reach with proper support." They met with a nonprofit director, a woman named Patricia Chen, who'd grown up in the Central Valley herself, who understood both agriculture and underserved communities. "What you've built is remarkable," Patricia said, walking through the garden, taking in the organized chaos of raised beds and trellises and enthusiastic kids everywhere. "But you're one person, one location. With our help, you could be 10 locations, 20. We could make this a regional model." "I don't want it to become corporate," Maria said. "I don't want consultants and bureaucracy and losing what makes this work." "What makes it work?" Patricia asked, genuinely. Maria thought about it. Presence, patience, treating kids like they matter, letting them fail safely, showing them that growth is possible. You can't bureaucratize that. "No," Patricia agreed, "but you can train others to do it. You can create frameworks that preserve the heart of what you're doing while allowing others to replicate it. That's what we're good at, taking successful grassroots projects and helping them spread without losing their soul." By summer, they'd secured a grant, $200,000 over 3 years, enough to hire coordinators, to expand to 3 new sites, to develop curriculum and training materials. Sophia, who just graduated high school, became one of the first paid coordinators. Marcus, now 15 and applying to an agricultural academy for high school, became a youth leader. Jasmine, entering 7th grade, started a junior mentorship program teaching younger kids. The garden that had started as Maria's response to betrayal was becoming a movement. Maria's daughter Carmen visited in July, bringing her 3 kids, Maria's grandchildren, teenagers who lived in the Sacramento suburbs and thought farming was something historical, something their ancestors did but they never would. They'd arrived with that particular teenage sullenness that communicates, "I'm here physically but not emotionally." They stayed all afternoon. By the end, Maria's oldest grandson, 17, usually glued to his phone, was helping Marcus repair the chicken coop, both of them debating the best way to reinforce the roof against raccoons. Her granddaughter was braiding Jasmine's hair while they waited for paint to dry on new garden signs. Her youngest grandson, 13, was following Daniel around asking 1,000 questions about building raised beds. Carmen pulled Maria aside as the sun was setting, painting the valley in impossible colors. "This is amazing, Mama, what you've built here." "It's not just me," Maria said automatically. "It's all of us." "I heard Daniel's been helping." Carmen's voice was careful. She and her brother hadn't spoken in over a year, not since she'd found out about the land theft. The betrayal had felt personal to her, too. That was supposed to be her inheritance someday, her children's inheritance. "He has," Maria said. "I still think you should have pressed charges." "Maybe," Maria acknowledged. She'd thought about it often, wondered if she'd made the right choice. But then we wouldn't have this, and he wouldn't have had a reason to become better. Revenge would have been easier, satisfying even, but this? She gestured at the garden, at her grandchildren mixing with neighborhood kids, at the community that had grown in the soil of loss. This matters more. Carmen looked across the garden, at Daniel teaching a group of kids how to use a level, patient and focused, at Mateo, the quiet 9-year-old, laughing at something Marcus said, at Sophia proudly showing Maria's granddaughter the tomato harvest, explaining each variety's characteristics. "You gave him grace," Carmen said quietly. "I gave him work," Maria corrected. "Grace is free. This is hard. This is showing up every day and proving you've changed, earning back trust with actions, not words. That's not grace. That's accountability with love." Carmen was quiet for a long time, watching her children interact with their uncle for the first time in years. "Maybe I should talk to him," she said finally. "Maybe you should." By the 1-year anniversary of the garden's opening, the transformation was measurable in ways that went beyond anecdotes. Test scores at Jefferson Middle School had improved by an average of 12% among garden participants. The dropout rate had declined. Local police reported a 34% reduction in juvenile incidents in the neighborhood. Social workers were documenting better outcomes for at-risk kids, improved school attendance, better family relationships, reduced behavioral issues. It wasn't magic. It was attention, structure, adults showing up consistently, kids learning they mattered. But the numbers, while impressive to grant funders and policymakers, weren't what Maria cared about most. She cared about specific stories, specific kids. Like Jasmine, who'd gone from barely passing to honor roll, who talked about wanting to be a botanist, to study plants professionally, who'd found confidence and voice through her tomato expertise. Like Marcus, who'd stopped getting into fights at school, who was applying to agricultural programs at community college, thinking about a career in sustainable farming, who'd become a role model for his younger brother and other kids in the program. Like Sophia, who'd found her calling, who was not just participating but leading, creating her own version of the garden at the group home, now consulting with 3 other group homes about starting similar programs. Like Mateo, who'd slowly emerged from his shell, who still didn't talk much, but who smiled now, who'd reunified with his father successfully, both of them coming to the garden together every Saturday, healing their relationship row by row, plant by plant. The local paper did another story, this time focusing on the kids. The headline read, "Growing More Than Vegetables, How One Fresno Garden is Changing Lives." Jasmine was featured prominently, talking about her tomatoes with the same intensity some kids applied to video games or sports. "Senora Maria taught me that if you pay attention to something, it grows. I think that's true for plants and people." Marcus discussed his plans. "I never thought I'd want to farm, but this showed me it's not just about growing food, it's about growing community. That's what I want to do with my life." Sophia said simply, "This garden saved me. I was aging out of foster care with no plan, no family, no hope. This gave me all 3. A nonprofit from San Francisco reached out. They'd read the article. They work on youth development across California. Would Maria be willing to present at their annual conference, share her model, potentially consult with other communities? Maria was 76 now. The thought of travel, of presenting to strangers, of becoming some kind of expert, it felt overwhelming. But Daniel encouraged her. "You have to share this, Mama. What you figured out. People need to know. Kids everywhere need this." "I'm not a teacher, not professionally." "You've been teaching your whole life. You raised 3 kids. You've taught probably 100 kids now how to garden. You're absolutely a teacher." Sophia was even more insistent. "You have to do this. Think about all the kids in other cities who could benefit. You can't just keep this to yourself." So Maria said yes. The conference was in San Francisco in October, nearly 2 years after that Tuesday morning when she'd discovered the theft. She took the train up with Daniel, who'd insisted on coming to support her. The presentation room was packed. Over 200 people, youth workers, educators, nonprofit directors, community organizers. Maria stood at the podium in her good dress, looking out at a sea of faces who expected expertise and polish. She gave them honesty instead. "I'm not an expert," she began. "I'm a grandmother who got mad about what my son did, and instead of destroying him, I decided to build something. That's all this is, a choice to build instead of burn down." She told the story simply: the theft, the betrayal, the 11 remaining acres, the first group of skeptical kids, the growth that happened when people paid attention. Gardens teach you things you can't learn any other way. Patience, because you can't rush growth. Acceptance, because you'll fail sometimes, and that's okay. Faith, because you plant seeds in dirt and trust they'll become food. And hope, because every spring, no matter what happened the year before, you get to start again. The room was silent, hanging on every word. "These kids I work with, the system has told most of them their problems: school suspensions, foster care, poverty, trauma. The world looks at them and sees deficits. The garden teaches them to see potential, to see that with the right soil and the right care, anything can grow." She paused, looked out at the audience. "My son took 12 acres from me, stole them, gambled them away. Every practical person would say I should hate him. Maybe I do some days. But hate don't grow nothing but more hate. So I took what was left, 11 acres and a broken heart, and I planted something different. And it turns out, when you plant hope, it multiplies." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. The conference led to connections Maria hadn't anticipated. 3 communities wanted to start their own versions of the garden. A university researcher wanted to study the program's impact on childhood development. A documentary filmmaker from Los Angeles wanted to make a short film. Growing Together, the nonprofit that had funded the initial expansion, wanted to go bigger. They'd secured additional funding, enough to expand to 7 new sites across the Central Valley. Would Maria serve as the program director? She was 76 years old. She'd never had a title like program director. She'd never imagined leading an organization. But she said yes, because 7 sites meant potentially 300 more kids, 300 more chances to show someone they could grow back. They hired staff. Sophia became the leave coordinator, managing day-to-day operations. Marcus, who'd graduated early from high school to pursue an agricultural certification, became the facilities manager. 2 other former participants, now young adults, joined as teaching assistants. Daniel handled logistics, scheduling, supplies, the practical infrastructure that kept everything running. He'd been sober for 2 years now, working steadily, paying Maria back $50 a month, every month without fail. It would take decades to repay what he'd stolen. They both knew the money wasn't really the point. The point was showing up, doing the work, proving through actions that change was real. Carmen reconciled with Daniel during this period, slowly, carefully, but genuinely. She drove down from Sacramento with her kids one Saturday, and instead of avoiding her brother as she'd done for 2 years, she approached him. "Can we talk?" They walked through the orchard together, the trees their father had planted, the land that had been the source of so much pain and transformation. "I was so angry at you," Carmen said, "for what you did to Mama, for stealing our inheritance, for being weak when we needed you to be strong. I know, you had every right to be. But I watched what you've done here, how you've shown up, how you've helped build this, and I realize if Mama had destroyed you, none of this would exist. All these kids who've been helped, none of it." Daniel didn't know what to say to that. "I'm not saying what you did was okay," Carmen continued. "It wasn't. It was terrible. But I'm saying I see you trying, and I'm willing to try too, to be your sister again, if you want that." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "I want that more than anything." They hugged for the first time in years, standing in their father's orchard, surrounded by the garden that had grown from loss, two siblings finding their way back to each other. Maria, watching from the porch, felt something in her chest ease. Not forgiveness exactly, but something close, something like peace. By year 3, the Garden of Witnesses program, they'd named it officially now, Sophia's idea, had expanded to 8 locations serving 247 kids. The model had been documented, studied, featured in educational journals. Maria was 77 now, slowing down physically but sharp as ever. She trained a team of coordinators who could run sessions without her, but she still taught regularly at the original site, her 11 acres, the place where it all started. The peach trees her husband had planted 43 years ago were still producing, though they were getting old, like her, like everything eventually. One Saturday in spring, they hosted a garden fair, all 8 sites coming together, showcasing what they'd grown, sharing food, celebrating community. 500 people packed onto Maria's property. Music played, kids ran between the trees, tables overflowed with produce and baked goods and starter plants for sale. Maria stood at the edge of it all, watching. Daniel was teaching a workshop on building raised beds. A crowd of adults and kids gathered around his demonstration. Jasmine, now 13, was giving tours to newcomers, explaining the program with the confidence of someone who'd found their purpose. Marcus and Sophia were demonstrating composting techniques. Mateo and his father were working together at the chicken coop, the man's hand resting gently on his son's shoulder. Carmen approached, carrying her youngest grandson, now 3 years old, fascinated by a tomato he was gripping with both hands, juice running down his chin. "Look what you built, Mama," Carmen said softly. "We built it, all of us," Maria corrected. "You could have destroyed Daniel. You had every right to, every reason, and instead you saved him, and in saving him, you saved all these kids." Maria watched a group of teenagers teaching a group of younger kids how to transplant seedlings, the patient instruction, the careful attention, the multiplication of knowledge and care. "I didn't save anyone. I just gave them dirt and seeds and time. They saved themselves. That's how it works. You can't save people. You can only create conditions where they can save themselves." Year 4 brought unexpected recognition. The program received a state award for community impact. The ceremony was in Sacramento, held in a nice hotel with politicians and nonprofit leaders and local news coverage. Daniel accepted the award on behalf of the organization. Maria had insisted he be the one to do it, over his protests. In his speech, he told the story everyone in the room probably knew by now, but he told it differently this time, not as a story of redemption, but as a story of choice. 3.5 years ago, I committed fraud. I stole from my own mother. I took land that represented my father's life's work and gambled it away. I was an addict in denial, hurting everyone who loved me, destroying everything I touched. He paused, looking out at the audience. My mother had a choice. She could have sent me to prison. I deserved it. She could have cut me off completely. I earned that. Instead, she sent me to rehab and then gave me a shovel and told me to start digging. A ripple of laughter. She didn't forgive me, not easily. Not quickly. Maybe not completely even now, but she gave me something harder than forgiveness. She gave me work. She gave me responsibility. She gave me a chance to prove day after day that I could be better than my worst moment. His voice thickened with emotion. And in giving me that chance, she created a model for hundreds of other people, kids who'd messed up, adults who'd failed, people who thought their story was written and couldn't be changed. This garden program, it's not about plants. It's about showing people that growth is always possible, that failure isn't final, that with patience and attention and care, anyone can bloom. The standing ovation went on for minutes. Afterwards, a young man approached Daniel, maybe 25, dressed in a nice suit, looking nervous. "I just wanted to say thank you. I was in your program 3 years ago. I was 16, just got out of juvie. Nobody thought I'd make it. But Senora Maria, she taught me about tomatoes. And somehow, learning to grow tomatoes taught me I could grow too. I'm in college now, studying social work. I want to do what you guys do, help kids like I was." Daniel's eyes filled. He pulled the young man into a hug. That was the moment he understood what his mother had built. Not just a garden, a multiplication of hope. Maria was diagnosed with congestive heart failure in year 5. Not immediately life-threatening, the cardiologist said, but serious. Her heart was wearing out. Time was finite. She'd known that intellectually, but knowing and feeling are different countries. She didn't tell anyone at first, except Daniel. He took the news hard. How long? They don't know. Could be years, could be less. Depends on how I manage it. Medication, rest, low stress. You need to step back from the garden. Let others handle it. The garden is the only thing keeping me alive, Maria said simply. I'm not stopping. They compromised. She'd reduce her schedule, delegate more, train others to do the direct teaching, but she'd still come, still be present, still be the heart of the program. Over the next year, Maria focused on succession planning, making sure the work would continue after she was gone. Sophia was ready to be the executive director. She'd grown from a scared 16-year-old in foster care to a confident leader who understood both the practical and emotional aspects of what they were building. Marcus would handle operations and facilities. Daniel would manage fundraising and community relations. A board was formed. Community members, educators, former participants who were now adults. The garden didn't need Maria anymore. That was both heartbreaking and exactly what she'd hoped for. Good work should outlive its creators. Jasmine graduated 8th grade with honors. She'd been accepted to a competitive agricultural magnet school. At her graduation party, held in the garden, naturally, she gave a speech she'd written herself. 4 years ago, I was 10 years old, and I didn't think I was good at anything. I thought I was just a kid from a rough neighborhood who wasn't going to amount to much. Then Senora Maria gave me a tomato plant and told me I had a gardener's name. She looked at Maria, sitting in a chair now instead of standing. Her heart couldn't handle standing for long periods anymore. She said gardening takes patience, that you have to believe in things before you can see them, that failure is just learning, that growth takes time, but it's always possible. Jasmine's voice was steady, confident, the voice of someone who'd found herself. She was right. I learned that I could grow things, but more than that, I learned that I could grow, that where I started didn't have to be where I ended up, that with the right soil and the right care, anyone can bloom, anyone can change, anyone can become something beautiful. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Maria listened with her heart full to bursting. This girl, this fierce, brilliant girl who'd started with one tomato plant and was now heading to an agricultural academy, who'd learned that she mattered by learning to make things grow. That multiplication, that was the legacy. Not land, not acres, but people who'd learned they could bloom. By year 6, the program had grown beyond anything Maria had imagined that Tuesday morning when she'd stood in her kitchen with property tax documents and a broken heart. 12 garden sites across 3 counties, over 400 kids participating annually, partnerships with schools, social services, juvenile justice, research showing measurable impact, improved academic outcomes, reduced recidivism, better mental health markers. But more importantly, stories. Hundreds of stories of kids who'd found themselves in the dirt, who'd learned patience tending plants, who'd discovered they mattered by mattering to something that grew. The program had been featured in documentaries, written about in journals, studied by researchers. Other communities were replicating the model, not just in California, but across the country. Maria Hernandez, a 79-year-old grandmother whose son had stolen her land, had somehow sparked a movement. But she didn't think of it that way. She thought of it as Daniel did something terrible, and I chose to plant seeds in the space his betrayal created. And the seeds grew. That was all. Maria Hernandez died on a Sunday morning in late April, 7 years after discovering her son's betrayal. She was 80 years old. She died in her sleep, peacefully, in the house she and Miguel had built, with the smell of peach blossoms drifting through her open bedroom window. The garden that had started on her 11 remaining acres had grown into 14 locations, serving over 600 kids annually. The organization she'd founded had assets of over $3 million, paid staff, volunteers, partnerships with dozens of institutions. But none of that was her legacy. Her legacy was standing in the original garden the day of her memorial service. 600 people gathered under the peach trees Miguel had planted half a century ago. Daniel and Carmen and Roberto and their families, Marcus and Sophia and their families, Jasmine home from her agricultural academy, Mateo, now 12, standing close to his father. Dozens of kids who'd learned to grow things in this soil, dozens more who'd been taught by those kids. The multiplication spreading like roots underground, invisible but vital. They didn't do traditional eulogies. Maria had requested that. Instead, people shared what they'd learned. A mother talked about bringing her daughter to the garden after a divorce, both of them broken, both of them learning that endings could become beginnings. A teacher talked about the transformation she'd seen in students, kids written off by the system finding value in themselves. A social worker talked about the ripple effect, how one stabilized kid stabilizes a family, which stabilizes a block, which eventually changes a city. Then Daniel stepped forward. He was almost 50 now, gray at the temples, hands calloused from 7 years of working the soil his mother had loved. He stood next to the original peach trees, now gnarled and old but still pushing out green leaves. He said to the crowd, "My mother lost half her land because of me." His voice was steady, the shame of the past replaced by the quiet dignity of atonement. She could have kept the rest for herself. She could have sold it and lived in comfort. Instead, she invited us in, the broken ones, the messy ones, the ones everyone else had given up on. He looked at Jasmine, at Marcus, at Sophia, adults now, leading their own lives, planting their own gardens. He taught us the most important thing a farmer knows, that the most valuable thing isn't the harvest you sell, It's the seed you save for next year. She saved us, and because she saved us, we can save others. After the service, as the sun began to dip low over the valley, casting those familiar long shadows across the earth, the crowd didn't leave immediately. They lingered. They walked through the rows. They touched the leaves of the tomato plants. They sat on the benches Marcus had built years ago. They told stories. Carmen stood with Daniel near the edge of the property, looking out at the spot where the 12 acres used to be, the land. A social worker talked about the ripple effect, how one stabilized kid stabilizes a family, which stabilizes a block, which eventually changes a city. Then Daniel stepped forward. He was almost 50 now, gray at the temples, hands calloused from 7 years of working the soil his mother had loved. He stood next to the original peach trees, now gnarled and old, but still pushing out green leaves. He said to the crowd, "My mother lost half her land because of me." His voice was steady, the shame of the past replaced by the quiet dignity of atonement. She could have kept the rest for herself. She could have sold it and lived in comfort. Instead, she invited us in, the broken ones, the messy ones, the ones everyone else had given up on. He looked at Jasmine, at Marcus, at Sophia, adults now, leading their own lives, planting their own gardens. He taught us the most important thing a farmer knows, that the most valuable thing isn't the harvest you sell, it's the seed you save for next year. She saved us, and because she saved us, we can save others. After the service, as the sun began to dip low over the valley, casting those familiar long shadows across the earth, the crowd didn't leave immediately. They lingered. They walked through the rows. They touched the leaves of the tomato plants. They sat on the benches Marcus had built years ago. They told stories. Carmen stood with Daniel near the edge of the property, looking out at the spot where the 12 acres used to be, the land that was now a housing development. For years, that view had been a source of pain, a reminder of what was stolen. "Do you still miss it?" Carmen asked, "the land we lost?" Daniel looked at the housing development, then turned back to look at the garden behind them. He looked at the hundreds of people talking, laughing, crying, connecting. He looked at the teenagers showing the younger kids how to hold a trowel. He looked at the legacy that had outgrown the property lines. "No," Daniel said softly, "I don't miss it, because looking at all this, I think we got the better deal." Maria had been right, as usual. The land itself was just dirt. It was silica and clay and organic matter. You could sell it, steal it, build on it, or pave over it. But what she had grown here couldn't be sold or stolen. The true legacy of Maria Hernandez wasn't the 11 acres of trees and vegetables. It wasn't the nonprofit with the bank account or the awards from the state. Her legacy was the dozens of young people who were now walking out into the world with a simple, radical truth in their hearts, that healing broken things, whether plants, relationships, or people, requires nurturing rather than punishment, that nothing is ever truly lost as long as there is someone willing to tend the soil. As the last guest departed, the wind picked up, rustling the peach leaves. It sounded like a whisper. It sounded like a prayer. It sounded like permission to keep growing.